This is Steve Ridgel, and in the last video, I talked some out of Psalm 51 about very practical advice from David about how to keep your past in the past, how to move away from your past, how to let your past, be your past. And we talked about things like understanding that God has hidden his face from your sins, that God has made you whiter than snow again. If you believe God, then you are forgiven. You don't have to be shackled to your past. Satan does not control you. The other thing we talked about a little bit in that last video was that David asked God to create in him a clean heart, a pure heart. And he asked him to renew a right spirit in him. So getting your heart focused on God and keeping it focused on God and having that right spirit, the right attitude, the attitude that says, today I will follow Jesus and I will focus on that and I'll live in my present and face my future, not live in my past. But some other things David says in that psalm that are very practical also. One of the things he asks God to do is restore to him the joy of his salvation. If you want to get past your past, you get up every day and you be happy, content, thankful in the fact that God has forgiven you. You get to live with God forever. I get up some days and I'm just astounding that God would want somebody like me to live with him forever. Want me so bad he'd let his son die for me. I need to be happy about that. Whatever happens in this world, look, Jesus is going to overcome this. I'm going to be home with God forever someday, and so that's what really matters. In fact, just a little bit after that, he tells God that he will sing the praises of God. He will sing of his righteousness. We've got to not just feel the joy of our salvation. We've got to express that. You need to tell God. You need to tell other people. We need to be constantly saying how happy we are. Our worship assemblies ought to look more like, they ought to look more like a party than a funeral. Man, we ought to be happy people. You ought to hear laughter in our assemblies. You ought to hear joyful singing in our assemblies. We've got to be happy about that. So when you do that, I think when you think about the joy you have because of your salvation and you express that joy, that helps you move past your past. And one other thing that'll keep your past in your past is David also promises God that he's going to tell sinners about God and about God's forgiveness, and they will come to God. I think we need to talk a lot about God's forgiveness. We need to share our testimony. We need to be living witnesses. We talk about it, we live it. We need to be sure that we are out there. So I think at church it's good to tell each other sometimes, here's what God has done for me. How are you doing today? How is this? Well, God's forgiven me and I'm thankful for. And sometimes it's even okay to say, here's who I was, but here's who I am. And then we especially need to be doing that with the non-believers that we find in our world. Your friends, your neighbors, your family who don't believe. We've got to tell them the good news of Jesus. And when we do, that'll help us move past our past. So, understand that God has forgiven you completely, that you are recreated whiter than snow. Focus on getting your heart right. Have the right attitude, the right spirit in you. Be thankful for the joy of your salvation. Express that joy and tell sinners the good news of Jesus. And you will find yourself moving past your past.